"Girls your size belong in the kitchen." The VIP guest said it with a smile, the kind of smile rich men practiced in mirrors before destroying someone in public. Olivia's heart froze with a silver tray balanced against her hip, a wine glass trembling near the edge, her black apron brushing the side of the table. Then she saw it. A crumpled receipt sticking halfway out of the man's jacket pocket. One name. One impossible name. The tray slipped from her fingers. Crystal shattered across the marble floor. And for the first time that evening, the Mafia boss looked up. 3 hours earlier, Olivia had been standing in the service elevator of the Moretti Grand Hotel with both hands pressed against a garment bag, trying not to wrinkle the black uniform hanging inside. The mirrored walls reflected everything she hated seeing. The roundness of her cheeks, the softness at her waist, the body that had cost her a management position she had spent 4 years earning. She still remembered the interview, the polished conference room, the hiring director smiling apologetically while explaining that the hotel needed a certain image at the front. A certain image. Those 2 words had followed her for 6 years. They followed her into kitchens, into stockrooms, into service corridors where guests never had to see her. Olivia adjusted the strap of her apron and stepped into the rooftop ballroom. Crystal chandeliers floated overhead like frozen stars. Waiters moved between tables carrying bottles that cost more than her monthly rent. Outside the glass walls, Manhattan glittered beneath a blanket of darkness. Inside, every seat belonged to people whose signatures could move millions of dollars. She knew most of their names. She had memorized them because that was what she did. She noticed things. It was easier to survive when nobody noticed her back. "Table 12, her supervisor said. "VIP section. Don't make mistakes." Olivia nodded and picked up a tray of 12-year scotch. Across the room sat Dante Moretti, the man everyone watched without appearing to watch. He occupied the corner table nearest the windows, dressed in a charcoal suit with no tie, one hand resting beside a half-finished glass of whiskey. Men leaned toward him when they spoke. Nobody interrupted him. Nobody raised their voice around him. Olivia had worked enough events to understand power when she saw it. And Dante Moretti carried power the way other people carried shadows. Quietly, permanently. The trouble began 20 minutes later when Richard Voss arrived. Richard moved through the ballroom like a man accustomed to doors opening before he touched them. Silver hair, perfect smile, expensive watch. Every executive rushed to greet him. Every manager suddenly stood straighter. Olivia approached with fresh drinks balanced carefully across her tray. Richard accepted his glass without looking at her. Then his eyes drifted downward. Not to the tray, to her body. The pause lasted only a second. But Olivia knew that pause. Every woman her size knew that pause. The silent calculation. The judgment disguised as observation. Richard smiled. "You know," he said lightly, loud enough for the entire table to hear, "girls your size belong in the kitchen." Laughter rippled around the table. Soft at first, then louder. Olivia felt heat climb her neck. Nobody told him to stop. Nobody looked uncomfortable. A woman near the end of the table lowered her eyes into her champagne flute to hide a grin. The silence afterward hurt worse than the laughter. Olivia swallowed. Her grip tightened around the tray. Then something caught her eye. A folded receipt protruding from Richard's jacket pocket. A splash of red wine stained the paper. And beneath the stain was a name she hadn't seen in 7 years. A name that was supposed to belong to a dead man. The name hit Olivia harder than the shattered crystal. For a second, the ballroom disappeared. The laughter, the music, the skyline beyond the glass. All of it faded behind a memory she had spent 7 years trying to bury. Arthur Vance. She stared at the wine-stained receipt in her apron pocket, while the cleanup crew swept broken glass from the marble floor. Arthur Vance was the man whose investment firm had collapsed overnight, taking hundreds of retirement accounts with it. The man newspapers claimed had died 6 months later in a boating accident off the Jersey coast. The man her father had trusted. The man whose signature had appeared on the final document before her father lost everything and put a gun in his mouth. Olivia forced herself to breathe. Around her, the gala resumed as though nothing had happened. That was the strange thing about wealthy people. They could witness cruelty, pause for 10 seconds, then return to discussing stock prices. In the service corridor, industrial dishwashers roared behind steel doors. Someone pushed a cart stacked with dirty plates past her. The smell of lemon detergent mixed with roasted garlic and expensive perfume. Normal sounds, normal smells. Yet something felt wrong now. Wrong in a way she could not explain. She slipped into a quiet prep station near the coffee service counter and unfolded the receipt. Her fingers were still shaking. It wasn't a restaurant receipt. It wasn't a purchase record. It looked more like a printed transaction confirmation. Most of the information had been blurred by red wine, but one detail remained clear. Timestamp: 7:14 p.m. Olivia checked the ballroom clock. It was only 8:03, less than an hour earlier. She remembered something else. Richard Voss had spent 20 minutes at the table bragging about a delayed flight from Miami. According to him, his private jet had landed barely 40 minutes before the event. The timeline didn't work. Not even close. Her stomach tightened. A shadow crossed the doorway. Olivia folded the paper instantly. Dante Moretti stood there, not blocking her path, not threatening, just standing quietly enough to make the room feel smaller. His eyes moved from her face to the coffee station, then to her clenched fist. "You dropped the tray because of him?" he asked. His voice was calm. Olivia almost said yes. Instead, she shook her head. "No, sir." Dante watched her for another second. Silence stretched between them. Not awkward, heavy. The kind of silence that made people reveal things accidentally. "Then why are your hands still shaking?" Olivia had no answer ready. Fortunately, a staff member appeared asking for additional espresso cups. The moment broke. Dante nodded once and walked away, but not before glancing at the digital event schedule mounted beside the doorway. Olivia noticed something strange only after he left. The schedule listed Richard Voss at table 12. Yet every seating chart she'd seen all evening assigned him to table 9. She stared at the screen. Someone had changed the assignment at the last minute. 10 minutes later, the mystery deepened. While delivering coffee to a side lounge, Olivia passed the executive coat room. The door was half open. Inside, Richard Voss stood with the event coordinator. His smile looked friendly. His voice sounded warm. "I appreciate discretion," he was saying. "Some guests become confused when they see paperwork that doesn't belong to them." He slipped an envelope into the coordinator's hand. Thick, heavy. The coordinator pocketed it immediately. Olivia stepped away before either man saw her. Back in the corridor, she pulled out the receipt again. This time she noticed something she had missed before. Printed beneath Arthur Vance's name was a second line. Not a company, not an address, a hotel suite number.
Suite 1814.
And according to the hotel's own records, Suite 1814 had been officially vacant for almost 3 months. Suite 1814 sat at the end of a private hallway reserved for executives who paid enough money to make questions disappear. Olivia knew because she had delivered room service there before. Not often, maybe 3 times in 2 years. Wealthy guests preferred privacy. Wealthy guests also preferred that staff forget what they saw. She folded the receipt carefully and slipped it deeper into the pocket of her apron. The paper felt heavier now, less like evidence, more like a live wire. The hallway outside Suite 1814 was empty when she arrived with a coffee cart she hadn't been assigned to deliver. The silver pot rattled softly each time the wheels crossed the seams in the carpet. Her pulse was loud enough to drown out the sound. The room should have been vacant. That was what the hotel system said. Vacant rooms didn't receive catering orders. Vacant rooms didn't generate transaction receipts. Vacant rooms certainly didn't request 2 espressos and a bottle of sparkling water at 7:11 p.m. Yet the order slip attached to the cart listed Suite 1814. Olivia stopped 3 doors away and stared at it. Her stomach tightened. Somebody had printed the order manually. There was no digital confirmation number. No guest profile attached. Just a room number and a rushed signature. She recognized the handwriting immediately. The event coordinators. The same coordinator who had accepted Richard Voss's envelope less than an hour earlier. A soft chime echoed from the elevator lobby behind her. Olivia stepped back into an alcove just as two men emerged from around the corner. One was Richard. The other wore a dark overcoat despite the temperature inside the hotel. They weren't speaking loudly. They didn't need to. Richard's smile was gone. The polished warmth he wore in public had disappeared. "The transfer clears tomorrow," the other man said. "Then we're finished." Richard glanced down the hallway. Olivia held her breath. "We're never finished," he replied quietly. "Not with people like him." The men continued toward a service stairwell and disappeared. Olivia remained frozen until the sound of their footsteps faded. Then she looked at the coffee cart again. 2 espressos, 2 cups, 2 guests, but only one room officially empty. Something was wrong. Something deliberate. She pushed the cart back toward the service corridor and nearly collided with Dante Moretti. He wasn't supposed to be there. His expression revealed nothing. One hand rested in his pocket. The other held his phone. "Interesting place for a waitress," he said. Olivia swallowed. "Interesting place for a coffee order." His eyes shifted to the cart, then to the order slip, then back to her face. Silence settled between them, heavy, controlled. She could almost feel him measuring the space between what she said and what she wasn't saying. "Who sent you up here?" he asked. "Nobody." It was the truth. Dante studied her for another second. Most people filled silence with excuses. Olivia didn't. That seemed to interest him more than the answer itself. He reached for the order slip. Read it once. Then again. Very slightly, his jaw tightened. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Enough for Olivia. "The coordinator signed this?" he asked. "Yes." "And the room is vacant?" "According to the system." Dante handed the slip back. "According to the system," he repeated. Then he walked away. No accusation. No reassurance. No declaration that he believed her. Just a question left hanging in the air. 20 minutes later, Olivia returned to the service station and checked the room records again. Suite 1814 still appeared vacant. But now another detail caught her eye. At 7:13 p.m., exactly 1 minute before the receipt had been printed, a second key card had accessed the room. The card wasn't assigned to a guest. It belonged to hotel management. The management key card sat on the monitor like a loaded weapon. Olivia stared at the access log until the numbers blurred together. 7:13 p.m. 1 minute before the receipt had been printed. 1 minute before a room officially listed as vacant somehow became important enough to hide. She printed a copy of the log and folded it behind the wine-stained receipt in her apron pocket. The paper crackled softly against the fabric. Proof. Not enough proof, but enough to make her afraid someone else might be looking for it. By 10 o'clock, the gala had shifted into its final act. The investors had moved from the ballroom into a private dining room overlooking the river. Floor-to-ceiling glass reflected crystal chandeliers and candlelight. Everything gleamed. The silverware, the marble, the people. Olivia felt like the only thing in the room that wasn't supposed to shine. She carried a tray of after-dinner coffee through the double doors and immediately felt the atmosphere change. Conversations softened. Eyes lingered, not because of who she was, because someone had already spoken about her. She recognized that feeling. The private dining room manager intercepted her before she reached the table. "Olivia." His smile looked professional. His eyes did not. "Mr. Voss mentioned you've seemed distracted tonight. Long shift. I'm fine." "Of course." He lowered his voice. "Still, some guests become uncomfortable when staff appear emotional. Perhaps stay in the service corridor for the remainder of the evening." The words sounded reasonable, helpful even, but she heard what sat beneath them. "Go away. Stay invisible." Olivia adjusted her name tag. "I was assigned to this room." The manager's smile tightened. "Assignments can change. Not without documentation." For a second, something flashed across his face. Irritation. Then it vanished behind polished hospitality. Very true. He stepped aside. Olivia continued forward. Her hands remained steady. The coffee never spilled. Across the room, Richard Voss watched the exchange over the rim of his whiskey glass. His expression never changed. That was what made him dangerous. Men who lost their temper gave themselves away. Richard looked as comfortable as a man discussing weather forecasts. "Miss Hart," he said when she reached the table. A word. Every conversation nearby seemed to pause without actually stopping. Olivia set a cup beside him. "Sir." Richard smiled. "I owe you an apology for earlier. My sense of humor can be misunderstood." His voice carried just enough volume for others to hear. Just enough to make himself look gracious. "Thank you," Olivia said. "Nothing more." Richard studied her for a moment. Successful people learn when to let small misunderstandings go. Life becomes much easier that way. There it was. Not a threat. Not openly. Something colder. An invitation to stay quiet. Olivia met his eyes. Some things aren't misunderstandings. The smile remained on Richard's face, but his fingers stopped moving against the stem of his glass. Across the table, Dante Moretti looked up. He didn't interrupt. Didn't defend her. Yet his attention shifted completely. Olivia could feel it. Richard leaned back in his chair. Interesting answer. Then he laughed softly and turned back to the others. The conversation resumed. The room exhaled. The moment appeared finished. It wasn't. 10 minutes later, Olivia passed the service station and found a document waiting beside the printer. A formal incident report. Someone had already written her statement for her. It claimed she dropped the tray because she became upset after being publicly embarrassed. It blamed distraction, emotion, personal sensitivity. At the bottom was a signature line with her name typed neatly beneath it, and in the corner of the page, approving the report less than 3 minutes earlier, was the same management ID linked to the keycard that had entered Suite 1814. Olivia stared at the incident report for a long moment. The printer hummed softly behind her. Somewhere down the corridor, dishes clattered into industrial racks and a dishwasher released a burst of steam. Ordinary sounds. Safe sounds. Yet the paper in her hands felt dangerous. It wasn't just that someone had written a false statement and expected her to sign it. It was how quickly it had appeared. 3 minutes. 3 minutes after her conversation with Richard Voss. 3 minutes after she refused to let his version of events become her truth. She folded the report carefully and slipped it into her apron pocket beside the receipt and the access log. Then she did something she probably should not have done. She went looking for records. The security office occupied a narrow suite behind the executive elevators. Most employees avoided it. Cameras made people nervous even when they had nothing to hide. Olivia knew one of the overnight technicians from years of delivering coffee. He was off duty, but his workstation remained unlocked. She didn't touch anything she wasn't supposed to. She only checked the event archive tied to Suite 1814. First, everything looked normal. Elevator footage, hallway footage, timestamps marching forward second by second. Then she noticed the gap. 7 minutes. Exactly 7 minutes missing between 7:09 and 7:16 p.m. Not corrupted. Not damaged. Removed. The realization settled into her stomach like a stone. Security systems lost random seconds. They did not lose exactly 7 minutes from exactly the hallway connected to a supposedly vacant suite. Olivia printed the log before she could talk herself out of it. The paper was still warm when a voice behind her nearly stopped her heart. "Working late." She turned. Dante Moretti stood in the doorway. Not angry, not smiling, just watching. The printer continued feeding paper into the tray between them. Olivia considered lying. She couldn't do it. Something doesn't make sense. Dante's eyes moved to the printout, then to her face. A lot of things don't make sense. Silence followed, the kind that seemed to absorb sound from the room. Olivia handed him the page. She expected dismissal, irritation. Instead, he studied it carefully. 7 missing minutes. His gaze lingered there longer than necessary. Then something shifted behind his eyes. Not belief. Recognition. 7 minutes, he said quietly. That's a very specific amount of time. Olivia nodded. Dante folded the paper once. Who else has seen this? Nobody. Another silence. Longer this time. He slipped the page into his jacket. Good. Before she could ask what that meant, footsteps approached from the hallway. The event coordinator appeared carrying a tablet. His smile arrived a second too late. Mr. Moretti. Miss Hart. His attention landed briefly on the printer. Then on Olivia's hands. Then on the empty output tray. Tiny movements. Easy to miss. Dante didn't miss them. Neither did Olivia. Everything all right? The coordinator asked. Of course, Dante replied. The coordinator relaxed too quickly. That alone felt strange. Then he laughed softly. These systems are getting old. Cameras lose footage all the time. Olivia looked at him. Before you even knew what footage we were discussing? The coordinator blinked. Just once. A tiny hesitation. I assumed. You assumed correctly, Dante said. His voice remained calm, almost gentle. Somehow that made the room colder. The coordinator excused himself a minute later. The moment the door closed, Dante remained perfectly still. Olivia had the unsettling feeling he was replaying every word that had just been spoken. Every pause, every glance, every assumption. Finally, he reached into his wallet and removed an old photograph no larger than a playing card. The edges were worn white with age. He held it beside the missing footage report. Olivia frowned. One figure in the photograph had been carefully cut out years ago. Not torn. Cut. Deliberately removed. Dante stared at the empty shape for several seconds. Then he looked toward the closed door through which the coordinator had disappeared. For the first time all night, Olivia saw genuine doubt. Enter the eyes of a man who was not accustomed to doubting the people closest to him. The rain had started sometime after midnight. It slid down the hotel's glass walls in long silver lines, turning the city lights beyond into blurred streaks of gold and white. Dante Moretti stood alone in his private office overlooking the river, the old photograph resting beside the missing footage report on his desk. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of a brass clock and the distant hum of traffic 30 floors below. He looked at the photograph again. One person had been carefully removed years ago, not ripped out in anger, cut out with patience, precision. Someone had wanted the absence itself to become invisible. His phone vibrated once against the desk. A message from his attorney. Requested records attached. Dante opened the file.
Personnel log.
Access histories. Internal approvals. Hundreds of pages most people would never read. He read every line. 20 minutes later, another file arrived. Security backup archives. The 7 missing minutes had not disappeared from the system by accident. A management override code had removed them. The code belonged to hotel operations, specifically to a senior executive with access granted years ago by someone Dante trusted without question. He leaned back in his chair, not angry, not surprised, just quieter. Across the hotel, Olivia sat alone in the employee break room. A vending machine buzzed softly beside her. The coffee in her paper cup had gone cold. Her apron remained folded across her lap, the receipt hidden inside one of its pockets. For a long moment she simply listened to the building breathe around her. Pipes, elevators, distant voices, normal sounds. Then her phone lit up. A bank notification. Her checking account balance appeared on the screen. Unchanged. She stared at it longer than necessary. Her mother's hospital bills were due next week. The number in that account wasn't enough. It never seemed to be enough. Yet somehow the thought of money felt smaller tonight. Smaller than the lie. Smaller than the feeling that someone had spent years deciding whose voice mattered and whose didn't. She folded the phone shut. When Dante entered the break room 10 minutes later, she almost didn't notice him. He carried no bodyguards. No assistants. Just a thin file folder. Miss Hart. Olivia stood immediately. Sir. Dante placed the folder on the table. You never signed the report. Because it wasn't true. He studied her face. Most people would have signed it. Olivia glanced toward the rain-dark window. Most people need their jobs. And you don't. A faint smile touched her lips. Sad more than amused. I need my mother's medication. I need the hospital to stop calling every week. I need my name on the schedule to stay where I earned it. She looked down at the folded apron in her hands. But I don't need a lie. Dante said nothing. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. Measured. He had spent most of his life around people who wanted money. Favors. Influence. Protection. Olivia Hart wanted something stranger. She wanted the truth to stay true. Eventually she reached into the apron pocket and placed the wine-stained receipt on the table between them. You should keep this. Dante looked at the paper but didn't touch it immediately. Instead his attention landed on a tiny detail hidden beneath the transaction number. A secondary authorization code. 6 digits. Almost invisible beneath the wine stain. His expression changed by less than an inch. Yet Olivia felt it. You've seen that before, she said quietly. Dante finally picked up the receipt. Yes. The answer came softer than expected. He opened the file folder and removed another document. An authorization form from 8 years earlier. The same 6-digit code appeared beside a signature. Not Richard Voss's. Not the coordinators. Not anyone connected to the hotel. The signature belonged to the man who had managed Dante's finances, protected his business interests, attended family funerals, and sat beside him through nearly every major decision of the last decade. Dante stared at the matching code for several seconds. Then he slowly closed the folder. For the first time that night, he realized he might have spent years watching the wrong people while trusting the one person he never thought to question. The next afternoon the rain was gone, but the city still looked washed clean through the towering windows of the executive conference floor. Sunlight spilled across polished walnut tables and expensive leather chairs. Everything felt orderly, controlled. The kind of room built to make powerful men believe they could shape reality simply by sitting inside it. Olivia stood near the back wall with a catering tray balanced against one hip. Coffee service. Nothing more. At least that was what everyone else believed. Dante sat at the head of the table. Calm. Silent. A half-finished glass of sparkling water rested untouched beside a stack of contracts. Across from him sat Victor Hale, the financial advisor whose signature matched the authorization code on the receipt. Beside Victor sat Richard Voss. Both men appeared comfortable, confident. They should have. Nobody had accused them of anything. Nobody had raised their voice. Nobody had even suggested there was a problem. That was the frightening part. Dante wasn't creating pressure. He was removing it, letting people relax inside it. Olivia had learned something about powerful predators. They rarely chased. They waited. A black folder sat in the center of the table. Closed. Unopened. Every few minutes Victor glanced at it. Tiny movement. Easy to miss. Olivia didn't miss it. Neither did Dante. The meeting continued for almost 30 minutes before Dante finally spoke. Victor. The room immediately quieted. Not because he spoke loudly, because he rarely wasted words. Victor looked up. Yes. Dante slid a single sheet of paper across the table. Refresh my memory. Victor smiled. About what?
Suite 1814.
A pause. Barely noticeable. Yet Olivia saw Victor's right thumb stop moving against his pen. Richard shifted in his chair. The paper remained untouched. Victor laughed softly. I don't believe I'm familiar with the room. Dante nodded. Interesting. Nothing more. Just that one word. Interesting. The silence afterward felt heavier than any accusation. Finally Victor picked up the page. Should I be? You tell me. Another pause. Olivia watched Victor's eyes move across the document. Then something happened. Not panic. Not fear. Recognition. Gone almost immediately. But not before she caught it. Looks like an administrative issue, Victor said smoothly. Hotels are full of those. Richard smiled. Too quickly. Too eagerly. Exactly. Dante said nothing. He simply lifted his water glass and waited. The room seemed to shrink around the silence. Then Olivia noticed something. Victor kept touching the inside pocket of his suit jacket. Not enough to draw attention. Just enough to reassure himself something remained there. The same motion. 3 times in 10 minutes. A habit. To tell. Her eyes narrowed. She had seen that movement before. The previous night. Outside the executive elevators. Right after the coordinator accepted the envelope. A memory surfaced with startling clarity. Victor wasn't holding a phone. Or a wallet. He had been checking a second keycard. The realization arrived so suddenly she almost dropped the coffee pot. Almost. Instead she steadied herself and quietly approached Dante's side to refill his glass. "Sir," she said softly. Dante looked up. The jacket pocket. That was all. Nothing else. She stepped away. Dante didn't react. Didn't even glance toward Victor immediately. Another 10 minutes passed. More discussion. More contracts. More numbers. Then Dante casually stood and crossed the room. "Victor." Victor looked up. "Yes." Dante extended his hand. "May I borrow your pen?" Such a harmless request. Such an ordinary question. Yet for one brief second Victor froze. Then he reached into his jacket. Not the breast pocket where the pen should have been. The inside pocket. The wrong pocket. The same pocket he had been guarding all afternoon. Something plastic slipped free with the pen. A white keycard. It landed on the table and slid several inches across the polished wood. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The small green light of the conference room camera blinked quietly above the doorway. Victor stared at the card. Richard stared at Victor. Dante looked at neither. He only watched the reflection in the polished tabletop. The reflection never lied. For the first time since this began, Victor Hale looked less afraid of Dante Moretti than he looked afraid of. The waitress standing silently at the back of the room. The key card stopped moving halfway across the polished table. No one reached for it. No one spoke. The faint hum of the conference room ventilation suddenly sounded louder than the people inside it. Victor Hale looked down at the card as though it belonged to someone else. Richard Voss stared at the tabletop. Olivia remained perfectly still beside the coffee service station. For several seconds, the entire room seemed trapped inside a single breath. Then Dante Moretti picked up the card. Not quickly. Not dramatically. He turned it over once between his fingers. The room's camera light continued blinking above the doorway, recording everything. "Interesting," Dante said quietly. The same word he had used before. This time, nobody relaxed afterward. Victor managed a smile. It looked painful. "I can explain that." "I'm sure you can." Dante's voice remained calm. "The question is whether the explanation survives contact with facts." He placed the card beside the black folder in the center of the table. Then he opened the folder. Inside were copies of the receipt, the access logs, the missing security report, and a freshly printed bank transfer summary. Olivia watched Richard's face lose color when he saw the final document. Not fear. Recognition. Dante noticed it too. "Let's simplify this," he said. "Who used Suite 1814? Victor answered immediately. Too quickly. "I don't know." "Then why did you carry the key card?" Victor opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. Nothing came out. The silence that followed felt heavier than any accusation. Richard finally leaned forward. "Dante, this is becoming something it isn't." "Then tell me what it is." Richard hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Olivia felt it ripple through the room. For days she had been treated as though she was emotional, distracted, sensitive, too large, too ordinary, too easy to dismiss. Yet now the powerful men around the table looked far less comfortable than she did. Dante slid another document forward. "Read the transfer trail." Nobody moved, so he read it himself. The funds linked to the receipt had not gone to Arthur Vance. Arthur Vance was dead. The money had moved through 3 shell accounts before arriving in a trust controlled by someone inside Dante's organization. Someone with authority. Someone with access. Someone who had approved the management override, authorized the deleted footage, and signed the same 6-digit code 8 years earlier. Victor looked down. Richard looked away. Dante stopped reading. A muscle moved once in his jaw. Olivia had the sudden realization that this was the first time all day he looked tired. Not physically. Something deeper. The kind of exhaustion that came from discovering a crack inside a foundation you believed would never move. "There's more," Olivia said softly. Every head turned toward her. She stepped forward and placed something onto the table. An old hotel backup drive. Small, black, easily overlooked. She had found it that morning in an archive drawer after remembering something the overnight technician once mentioned. Automatic backups ran separately from the main security system. Deleting footage from one system did not always erase the copy. Victor went pale. This time everyone saw it. Dante stared at the drive, then at Olivia. "You checked the archive?" "The 7 minutes were missing from the main server," she said. "Not from the backup." Nobody interrupted her. Nobody laughed. Nobody told her to go back to the kitchen. Dante inserted the drive into his laptop. The room became impossibly quiet. The recovered footage appeared on the screen.
Suite 1814.
Timestamp 7:13 p.m. Victor entering with the management key card. Richard already inside. And a third man waiting near the window. A man Dante recognized instantly. The room blurred around him for a second. Not because he didn't know the face. Because he knew it too well. The man in the footage was his longtime consigliere. The man who had attended his father's funeral. The man who had stood beside him for 12 years. The man Dante trusted more than almost anyone alive. Nobody spoke as the footage ended. Dante stared at the frozen image. His expression revealed almost nothing. Almost. Then he slowly removed his glasses and placed them on the table beside the receipt. When he finally looked up, his eyes settled on the firm's chief attorney sitting silently near the far wall. "Call my attorney." No one left the conference room for nearly an hour after Dante spoke those 3 words. "Call my attorney." The consequences arrived quietly. That was the frightening thing about real power. It rarely needed to raise its voice. By sunset, Victor Hale had been removed from every financial account connected to the organization. His access codes were disabled. His office locked. Federal investigators received copies of the transfer records through channels that guaranteed the evidence would not disappear. Richard Voss lost something different. Not freedom. Not yet. He lost credibility. The recovered footage, the transfer trail, and the deleted security records spread through boardrooms and private investment circles faster than gossip ever could. Men who had once stood when he entered a room suddenly stopped returning his calls. The event coordinator resigned before formal proceedings could begin. The management executive who approved the false reports was terminated and placed under investigation. The lies did not collapse all at once. They unraveled thread by thread until there was nothing left holding them together. 2 weeks later, Dante stood in the hotel's grand ballroom again. The same chandeliers glowed overhead. The same polished marble reflected the lights. The same room where laughter had followed Olivia like a shadow. This time, every department manager was present. Human resources, operations, security, catering, a formal review session, official, recorded. Olivia sat near the front, uncomfortable in the attention. Dante remained standing. A folder rested in front of him. "Miss Olivia Hart," he said. The room became silent. Olivia looked up. For a moment she almost didn't recognize what felt different. Then she realized it. Nobody was calling her waitress. Nobody was speaking about her as though she weren't there. Dante opened the folder. Inside was her personnel file. The original one. Not the altered version. Not the rewritten reports. The real file. Graduated top of her hospitality management program. His voice remained calm. Highest. Customer satisfaction evaluations in her training group. Recommendations marked exceptional. Several managers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Dante continued. Denied promotion due to image concerns. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. because the words sounded worse when spoken aloud than they ever had on paper. He closed the folder. That decision has been removed from the record. Another document appeared beside it. Then another. Corrected evaluations. Updated employment records. Back pay for opportunities improperly denied. A formal apology entered permanently into the personnel archive. Not hidden. Not buried. Recorded. Olivia felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. Not because of the paperwork. Because someone had finally written the truth where the lies used to be. Later that afternoon, a legal representative visited her mother's apartment. Hospital balances were reviewed. Insurance disputes reopened. Predatory fees challenged. Not erased as charity. Corrected because they should never have existed in the first place. The difference mattered. Dante understood that now. Weeks passed. The hotel changed in ways guests would never notice. Hiring standards were rewritten. Promotion reviews required independent oversight. Anonymous complaints received direct investigation. Small changes. Quiet changes. The kind that prevented people from disappearing inside a system. One evening near closing time, Olivia remained alone in a newly renovated office overlooking the river. Her office. Not extravagant. Just hers. A framed document hung on one wall. Her management certification. On another shelf sat something stranger. A black apron inside a simple glass case. The same apron. The same pocket. The same place where a wine-stained receipt had survived long enough to tell the truth. Months earlier she had hidden behind that apron. Now it stood as proof that being overlooked was not the same thing as being unimportant. A soft knock came at the door. Dante stepped inside carrying 2 cups of coffee. He placed one on her desk. For a while neither spoke. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass. Finally Dante looked at the framed apron. "Funny thing," he said quietly. Everyone in that room thought power was sitting at the table. Olivia wrapped both hands around the warm coffee cup. "It wasn't." Dante studied her for a moment.
No.
She smiled softly. Not proud. Not bitter. Simply certain. Then she looked toward the apron and said, "People only ignored it because they thought they already knew what was inside." Dante said nothing after that. He just looked at the glass case, at the worn black fabric, at the pocket that had carried the truth when everyone else chose convenience. And in the quiet that followed, it finally felt as though the right person had been heard.